So just like for centering with the slab that we talked about on Monday, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to compress this clay down into the wheel head, take my finger, just kind of seal it on there so it doesn't slide around. Okay, I want my clay to be wet but not sticky, all right? And I'm going to remind myself of that throwing body position, right? So I've got my arms in at my side, I'm locked in, I'm kind of in a lunge position. Again, when you're sitting down, you're going to be locked in either to the splash pans on your arms or you're going to be locked into your knees, right? That's going to make it so much easier to get that centered. So I'm going to start that coning process again. My wrists are as straight as they can be on either side of the clay. If you're finding that your wrists are back here, slide your hands back so you have a straight wrist. This is asking your hands to do all of the work. It's also over time going to give you carpal tunnel and will really do some damage. So always trying to have your wrists straight so that you can compress with the weight of your whole upper body. So I'm slowly coming up. I've come up into my cone position. I'm going to clean up the floor by just using my sponge and my finger just to push in. That's going to allow my hands to again grab that clay at the bottom. And then I'm going to take the palm of my hand and the side of my hand and I'm going to cone this thing down. So I'm pushing that pressure from the top and I'm pushing quite a bit of strong pressure on the side, okay? So that this clay doesn't become any wider. And so I'll just go ahead and cone that down. I'm going to pause right there to get a little bit more moisture because things got a little sticky there. Put my hands right back on and I can compress this clay down and in. Keep in mind that when you're doing that strong compression that you've got one hand on the side and one hand on the top from the center out, right? If anybody was getting sort of a divot in the middle, it's probably because you're using the corner of the palm of your hand to push down to the center and you want to bring that sort of towards you a little bit. So I like to use sort of from my pinky down on a half of the clay that's closest to me. And then I can push down really strongly and push in really strongly with my side hand. And I can knock this right on center. Okay? So to begin with, you may find yourself coning 2 or 3 times or maybe more. Ultimately, you will get to a point where you're efficient enough to just do it once. Okay? This is a sort of wedging on the wheel too, so we'll also sometimes identify when you have, if you have a few other air bubbles, sometimes you can pop those while you are centering. The more times you cone, however, the more water you incorporate into your clay, the softer your clay becomes, the weaker it becomes structurally. So at the end of the day, you want to learn to be a little bit more efficient, maybe cone up and down once or twice, get your clay centered, and then move on. Okay, so I've got my flat slab, or my centered ball of clay. I've cleaned up my wheel head because again, we're going to bring this out into a 6-inch flat slab. And I'm going to be doing that by pushing down again, using that sort of kind of corner of my pinky down. I'm going to be pushing down more pressure with my top hand, but I'm pushing some with the side hand. So for those of you who mentioned that you had trouble keeping it on center when you're doing this, it's probably because you're not using enough pressure with that side hand. So it just needs a little bit more stability because what you're doing is you're pressing on the X and Y axis, and if you just press on one, there's nothing there to keep the other one in check, okay? So again, I just got a little bit more water. Sometimes I like to hold my sponge in my hand so I can just kind of squeeze water as needed. For beginners, sometimes that feels a little bit cumbersome. So do whatever feels good. So again, I'm pushing down, but I'm pushing in with this side hand. I'm gonna grab my ruler and I'm gonna take a measurement. So that is actually 6.5 inches. So I'm gonna readjust. Let's start with 6.5 inches for your flat ball of clay, or your flattened pancake of clay for these. So if we all start with 6.5 inch flat pancakes like this, that is going to help us all make an 8-inch plate a little bit more consistently. Okay, so this is pretty thick, right? This couldn't be the thickness of the bottom of our plate. So we're going to open the ball here by, I just like to use the corner of the palm of my hand. I'm going to push down a little bit. Okay, so I've just made kind of a little depression there, right? And I'm going to and I'm just using the corner of my wrist there. And I'm going to then now start walking this clay towards myself. I'm still pushing back with this hand because I don't want this to get any wider. So this really hand on the outside becomes your guide. All right, so I'm gonna grab that clay and I'm gonna slowly walk this out to create this sort of donut shape.
You make it look so easy.
Yeah, that's because I've been doing it for like 30 something years. Practice, practice. So I'm gonna bring this out, and I've sort of switched from using that corner of my hand to the flat part of the side of my hand, and I'm doing what? What am I doing here, guys?
Compressing.
I'm compressing, right? So I'm compressing that.
And the divot is half an inch or an
This is, you're gonna go, yeah, because our flat slab was a little bit more than an inch. So if I stop my wheel here, and a great way to tell this is to take your needle tool, and I can just go all the way down to the wheel head, put my finger right here and come out. And so that's about 3/4 of an inch. So I could actually go down a little bit further in this to get myself a half an inch. Don't worry about the little hole. That will just get compressed right back together. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go down just probably about another 1/4 of an inch and bring that clay out. If you get a spiral in the center, it's because you brought your hand out too quickly. And that's why I like to use the side of my hand instead of my fingers, because there's more surface area and there's less likelihood of that happening. So,
How thick did you say the bottom?
half an inch
Half an inch to trim.
to trim. The
Okay.
floor of your plate should be a half an inch to trim. So if I stop this again, it's a little bit more than a half an inch, but I'm still gonna do some compressing here. And that compressing is going to thin this thing out to be the right thickness. Okay, let's start that up again. Slow that down a little bit. Okay, that's too slow. All right, so now that I have this floor set up, I'm gonna switch, and I'm just using my sponge underneath my fingers, and I'm just gonna start walking my fingers from the center back out and back in. And this is doing, again, compressing. So I'm just spending some time. This is, you know, if it's gotten a little bit wobbly at this point, this is an opportunity to kind of smooth this out. You can switch to a flat rib, okay? And just kind of hang out there. Now, if you're gonna take a rib across the center of a plate, you don't want it to be right in the middle, you want it to be over to the side. And I'm only putting pressure on this right-hand side here, because if I put pressure on the left-hand side, it's gonna dig in and flip around. So I'm just putting that pressure down, really compressing that clay. Okay, carefully releasing. I'm gonna come back at this point and I'm gonna compress this rim. Right, we've stretched this clay out, so we need to compress it back into itself, even it out a little bit. And now I'm gonna do a little bit of work on the outside, and I'm gonna take my sponge in front of my finger. I'm just gonna push in a little bit, and that's helping to raise this donut of clay up so that now I can grab it with my fingers and make a pull. So I've just raised it up a little bit there on a, I don't know, 45-degree angle, and come back and compress this rim again. I'm gonna make a plate that has a distinct floor and a distinct rim. So I'm just using the round part of my rib here to delineate that. And you can use these hotel key cards and like cut out your rim, you know, if you wanna use a similar kind of shape. You don't have to spend a ton of money on other tools. So now I'm gonna pinch this clay, and I'm gonna grab this clay and I'm gonna pinch it between my fingers, and I'm gonna pull it up kind of on a 45-degree angle. And the reason I'm doing that on a 45-degree angle is because clay has really great memory. And so if I pull it up, it will remember that as its first movement, as opposed to being pulled out, which then it could kind of flop over and down. So the last thing I'll do is I'll stretch it a bit flatter. But I'm gonna get underneath with my fingers, and I'm on the right-hand side of the wheel, right? So the wheel is coming in, the clay is coming into my fingers. Those of you on a kick wheel, if you're kicking left-handed or you're kicking the opposite way, your hands need to be over here. But your hands should always be, the clay should be coming into your hands, whatever side of the wheel you're working on. So I'm gonna grab this clay, and I'm just gonna start to pinch. And I'm holding still right now. I'm just pinching, and I'm slowly bringing my hands up and out. I'm doing a little bit more lifting from the bottom with my bottom hand. I'm kind of lifting the clay up. I'm carefully releasing, and then I'm going to come back and support on either side with 2 fingers and compress that rim again. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to set up the taper. Right? So if we look at this plate of Diana's, she's got a really nice taper. It goes from thick to thin, right? And so that's what I'm trying to set up. Is I'm going to leave more clay behind this area here, and it's going to taper out. So I'll start again with my fingers underneath, lifting up. If you find that your rings, your finger marks are not right on top of each other, if they're not concentric, you're going too fast with your hands. So again, I'm going to support on either side. I'm going to compress that rim so it's nice and smooth and round. And I'm going to come and I'm going to make one more pull to just even things out. Okay, and again, coming back, compressing that rim. As your walls get thinner, it's going to mean you really need to have a lot of support to make sure when you're compressing the rim, you're not pushing the rim down and over. I'm going to take my ruler. I'm going to take a measurement. That's 7.5 inches. If I'm going to an 8-inch plate, I just have a little bit more to do, and that little bit more to do is really going to be in the form of stretching. So at this point, I am actually going to take my wooden knife tool on the backhand side. I'm going to come and I'm going to cut away this extra clay. And what am I also doing hanging out here? I'm compressing, right? So I'm compressing this area, and I'm going to take my knife tool away. I can flip it over and go down on the wheel head and grab that clay. I can flip it over again just to clean it up. Now, this part is really important, especially since we're going to be trimming these plates, because we want a really clean, nice line here so that we can flip this over and center it upside down, and it's much easier to center when we have a clean bottom base, okay? So I've compressed this in, and the reason I've done this trimming first is you'll notice that what happened to the rim of my plate when I did that. It got a little wobbly, but it also went up a little bit more, right? And so I don't want to stretch my plate down and then go in and push and have it come back again and then press it back down, because it messes with that memory of the plate, okay? So I've compressed that clay up and in. There's still a lot more clay here, but I'm going to trim that out later, okay? So now I can take my rib and I'm going to go back to the center of my plate. I'm going to compress that another time, really clean it up so it's really nice and smooth. And it's making a nice crisp edge there. Now I'm going to take my sponge. I'm going to get it, sort of squeeze all the water out so I'm not putting a lot of moisture on the back of this plate, but I'm going to support underneath here and just take the back side of this rib and I'm going to stretch this plate out and down. I want it to stay on about a 30-degree angle slope, so that again, in the firing process, if it does any slumping, it will slump to flat as opposed to slumping from flat to flopping, okay? I can switch my tool again. It's those little tiny 1,000 corrections of ceramics, right? I can come back and clean this up again. Last thing I'm gonna do on this plate is I'm just gonna double check its width. I'm exactly at 8 inches. And now I'm just going to address this rim one more time by supporting on either side and just giving it a little bit compression and making a little bit round. Now I don't love what the sponge has just done here, so I'm going to grab a little piece of plastic. Okay, I'm just going to rip off a little bit of this plastic. You can buy expensive chamois to do this with, but it's just as easy to fold the plastic over and hit it there with a little bit of compression. And that got rid of those kind of little streaks from the sponge. And it gave it a nice smooth compressed rim. Okay, so now I'm ready to cut this off of the wheel. So I'm going to stop the wheel. I'm going to clean my hands up.